The president must work with the government, but for Singapore. That was one of Mr. Ng's zingers, one of his quotable quotes during his session with myself, which I had online with him a couple of weeks ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. And before I get to exercise my moderator's privilege and ask a few questions and describe the rules for tonight, I would like to first invite Mr. Ng to basically give us a speech and tell us basically why he should be the next president of Singapore.
Thank you.
Mr. Ng.
Thank you. Thank you, Walid. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming this evening for me to listen to the questions which are of interest to you, and hopefully what I have to say may be useful to you. I want to take a few moments to share with you the sequence of events that led me to this life-changing decision to stand for the presidency. It started around March this year when I participated in a series of interviews which were being done to create a documentary on Singapore's reserves. I was invited to participate in those interviews because of my whole career at the Ministry of Finance in the Monetary Authority of Singapore and at the GIC. And they wanted to draw on my experience and explain in relatively simple language some of the issues of interest to Singaporeans. I mean, issues such as where did the reserves come from? What are the sources of Singapore's reserves? Of course, the short answer there is, number one, the past accumulated budgetary surpluses of the Singapore government since independence. Number two, Central Provident Fund savings, which we now know amounts to over $500 billion. And thirdly, capital inflows into Singapore, particularly in more recent years when Singapore became a place of refuge for global capital. Another question which was put to me was, why do we say that the reserves are of strategic importance to Singapore? Well, the short answer is, number one, it is part of our total defense in times of war. It is our financial defense. And I recounted my experience during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, when Kuwait was able to recover their country because they had considerable reserves to partially pay the Americans to liberate their country and then to rebuild the country. And the other reason why the reserves are strategically important is look at what happened during the pandemic or during the global financial crisis. The reserves were savings for a rainy day. When times get difficult, we can fall back on our past reserves to make the economy resilient, save jobs, and provide relief for the low-income group. And the third reason is that it is the reserves of Singapore that is why there's so much confidence in the value of the Singapore dollar, why the Singapore dollar has been so strong and stable, and that has helped us to keep inflation down. So those points, although you may say we know them, they were hardly explained to the people of Singapore. And then there were other questions such as, why do you say that the reserves benefit present generations of Singaporeans? because the misperception is that these are reserves which we locked up to benefit future generations. I don't think enough people in Singapore know that in addition to the past reserves, which we're saving for the future, the investment returns on those past reserves, 50% of that goes into the government's budget and therefore help us to pay for expenditure, and which means that we do not have to raise taxes in order to avoid a deficit. That is how the reserves benefit present generations of Singaporeans and also future generations. So anyhow, I participated in those series of interviews, and that left me with the feeling that not enough has been explained to the people of Singapore. And maybe because of my long experience of working on the reserves, there are not many of my contemporaries who are still around to explain that. So that was the first event. The second event was when I was also being filmed for another documentary. And this was the documentary to commemorate the 100th birthday of our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I was interviewed for that documentary because of my long association with Mr. Lee. First, when he was the chairman of the GIC for 30 years, and I was the chief investment officer towards the end of my career. But more than that, I had the privilege of helping Mr. Lee Kuan Yew to learn meditation. And that privilege put me in closer contact with him on a personal basis. And I was invited to share what I saw as the compassionate side of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. So I recounted one particular episode, which was when my late wife, Patricia, was diagnosed with cancer about 18 years ago in 2003. On that particular occasion, Patricia was receiving chemotherapy treatment at the hospital. It was in July 2003, and she said that she would like to write a letter to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. So I said, what for? She says, it's got nothing to do with you. You just deliver the letter. And she shared the letter with me, and the opening lines were, Dear Senior Minister Lee, every year when National Day approaches, I had wanted to write you a letter of appreciation, but never found the courage to do so. Recently, I was diagnosed with terminal stage cancer, so this may well be my last National Day. And so I'm writing this letter to thank you for all that you have done for us Singaporeans. My husband and I have raised 3 children, and we feel so fortunate to be living in Singapore because you have given us such a high standard of living. You have made us all to be proud Singaporeans. Mr. Lee wrote back 2 days later, Dear Patricia, I'm so touched that at this time when you face this grave illness, you still found the time and the energy to write me this letter. So when I recounted that episode, then I felt that what Patricia was saying in her letter to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was probably how many of us in Singaporeans felt about the difference that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew made in our lives. So the thought then occurred to me, what can I do at this stage of my life to say thank you to the people of Singapore, to honor Mr. Lee Kuan Yew on his 100th birthday celebration. So that was the second event. The third event was when my friend and former colleague Tharman announced that he was standing for the office of president. And he said that he would very much like to be elected as president. It would mean a lot to him to be president with a mandate from the people of Singapore. So when I heard those words, when I read that in the papers, the thought kept ringing in my head, who can give Tharman a credible contest? Why not you, Kok Song? Why not you? So those were the three events. Then, of course, there was a short period of discernment. I had to ask myself, what are your motives to stand for presidency? I think this is when my practice of meditation over a period of 35 years helped me considerably to examine my motives for what I was about to do. Am I doing it for money? Am I doing it for power? Am I doing it for fame? Well, I felt at 75 years old, I don't really care about all those three things. And so it was quite clear to me that I want to do it to honor the office of the president. Because there was a risk that if I did not come forward, there might not be an election. And even when Mr. George Goh threw his hat into the ring, I was concerned that he may not qualify. And if he didn't qualify, what does it mean? Another walkover. And that would not be good. The people of Singapore would be very disappointed that again, they did not have the chance to choose their president. So that was the reason why I decided to go ahead. I consulted some friends, close personal friends, and some of my contemporaries who were working with me in the public service. Most of my personal friends dissuaded me. They said, Kok Song, you have done enough. You should enjoy your retirement. But most of my public sector friends say, Kok Song, if you feel very strongly about it and that you want to do this to serve the people of Singapore, go ahead. The final person I consulted was my fiancée, Sybil. Sybil was quiet for quite a while. And she said, do you know that if you were to stand for president, you're going to blow my private life apart? Do you realize that you and I are going to undergo considerable scrutiny? Our private lives is really nobody's business. But when you are standing for the presidency, everybody makes it their business. But Sybil said to me, Kok Song, if you feel strongly that you want to do this, I'm prepared to endure what you will have to go through. I will support you fully if you decide to stand for the presidency. So it's taken me quite a while to explain to you, but that's the truth.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng. So, I was actually quite struck how come Sybil was the last and not the first person you asked. But okay, we can get that. We can get that during
Our
the.
wife always has the last say.
Okay, noted. That's good life advice for me. All right. So let me just explain some rules first. So when the floor is open for question and answer, it will be we will not be taking the pictures or we will not identify the questioner, but the questions and answers can go online. Okay, it's just that the identity of the questioner will not be known. So feel free to post anything you guys want online. That's fine from this event. Okay, so we'll get to the Q&A in a while. So meanwhile, let me ask a few questions. And I need to say, Mr. Ng didn't ask me for the questions beforehand, so he doesn't know what I'm going to ask. And that's very rare, you know. Usually people want a more polished set of question and answers. So, and I prefer it this way, and he does as well. So the first question for you is, you have done some campaigning already. Where are we at now? I see there being four main groups of voters. One is the pro-PAP, pro-Taman, so they will vote Taman. The other one is not, the second one, not pro-PAP, but quite pro-Taman. They like him, so they will vote Taman. The third one is pro-PAP, but not hardcore. In a GE, they will vote.
I mean, there are so many groups pro-PAP.
But not hardcore, and in a PE, they are willing to rock the boat a little, and this will be the Ng Kok Song voters. And then the final one will be the anti-establishment. And now it's split into three. One will be for you, one for Tan Kin Lian, the other spot votes. So now the question is, which group has the upper hand, or where do you think you are at now?
Nowhere. Well, I think in a very simplistic way, you might say I represent the middle ground. Neither left nor right. How big is the middle ground? Can the middle ground take some ground from the left? Can the middle ground take some ground from the right? That will determine the outcome of the election. But I think the way that you are framing it, PAP, opposition party, sadly, is the wrong way of looking at it. And talking about establishment, independence, is not an accurate way of describing the office of the president. If you look at the Constitution of Singapore, in regard to the requirements for standing as president, there's one particular clause which says that the person being nominated for the office of president should not belong to any political party. That is in the Constitution. Now, we all know that since the office of the elected president was introduced, all presidential positions were endorsed by the governing party. I would submit that it's not in keeping with the spirit of the Constitution. It was keeping with the letter, technically, but it's not in keeping with the spirit of the Constitution. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the thinking, what is the logic behind the intent of the Constitution? It is the intent of the Constitution that the president should be non-partisan. The right word is partisan and non-partisan. I have to explain this to the people of Singapore who may not understand, such a highfalutin word. I said no partisan means no party. No party. Why? Because the president must not be beholden to any political party, whether it's the governing party or even if the opposition party comes into power, the president's job is the people of Singapore, to safeguard the people of Singapore, not to assist in the agenda of any political party. So if we look at the current slate of candidates, the three candidates, candidate number one, endorsed by the government, People's Action Party. Candidate number two, who are his assentors? Several opposition parties. Third candidate, Ng Kok Song, no party.
Thank you. I do agree that I had framed it in the question in a way that is not consistent with the Constitution of Singapore. I accept.
Yes.
What I would say is, don't you think that is how Singaporeans are viewing this election as well?
Sadly, and so I hope that this election will change the status quo. It must. Otherwise, we are not maturing in our body politic. So the word non-partisan is extremely important.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. So what I wanted to follow up on that, because you also made this point quite forcefully in terms of resigning from the political party 2 months. It's in line with the letter but not spirit of the Constitution.
Yes.
Do you think we should make it explicit in the Constitution then? As a citizen, as now a thought leader, do you think we should change the Constitution to include maybe a time period, moratorium of sorts, like 5 years, and then you can join? 5 years from a party, basically clean yourself from being perceived to be partisan, then join.
I think we have got two challenges. The first challenge is to find enough good and capable people to come forward who are able to meet the strict criteria to be nominated as president. I mean, the criteria are set at a very high level. You know, I had to go through a deliberative process, even though I worked on the reserves for 45 years. So it's very high standards. Very high standards means it's very difficult to get enough good and capable people coming forward, all right? And maybe that is the reason why we allowed candidates to stand for presidency within a matter of 2 months after they resigned from their previous political party. So it's something that we need to think about, and maybe, you know, in the next revision of the Constitution pertaining to the elected president, we should think about it. And maybe the solution would not be to have the custodial powers of the president in regard to the safeguarding of reserves and the integrity of the public service. Maybe it should not be vested in one person. I mean, right now you have one person who acts on the advice of the Council of Presidential Advisors, but maybe we should look at alternative arrangements whereby the custodial powers could be vested in maybe an upper house of parliament, for example. These things have to be considered. But as of now, I'm standing for president under the present rules.
Right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if I could share an anecdote, actually, this event was supposed to start at 7 today, and this moving related to the next thrust of my questioning. So, but I told Mr. Ng's team that I needed to just excuse myself for 5 minutes at about 7:20 to do my prayers, and And his team said, okay, let's just start at 7:30, right? And you mentioned that there are 3 things to protect. And I really appreciate that 3 things a president can help protect: the civil service, the reserves, and the multiracial, multi-religious nature of Singapore, the people, right? And that was going to be my question, because as I was reflecting on telling your team that I had to do my president, I'm thinking, in Singapore, now we are going through the Hungry Ghost festival as well, and a lot of multiracialism and multi-religiosity is about dealing and accepting differences, even if sometimes it can be a bit irritating, minor irritants, right? If the event has to start late and so on. So, and I really wanted to get your thoughts on race and religion, but race specifically, right? How important will it be, if at all, of a factor in this election? Do you think race will feature?
I really do not know, because we could be dealing with a fluid situation, all right? I mean, ideally speaking, to be a truly united country, all right? For us to be able to say, regardless of race, language, or religion, which is in the Singapore Pledge, there shouldn't be that bias, ideally.
Oh, okay. I was thinking whether you had more to.
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, you see, our identity is a very human thing. But so many problems in the world arise from over-identification with your race, with your religion, with your country. That is a problem for humanity. When children were born, they were free from any identity. They came from the source. And from the source, we are all one. We are all equal. But as we grow up in life, we begin to pursue our own identity. First of all, as a child, you begin to assert yourself. I am an individual. And then as we go through the challenges of life, we identify with race, language, religion, And that is the reason why I practice meditation. I want to go to the source of my being, to come to an experience where I'm at one with everyone. I think that is the deepest spiritual experience, which I hope as many people in the world can come to.
That was a very presidential answer, if I could say. So you wouldn't want to win because of race, right? You would want to win because you are the better candidate. Right?
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just my final question, right? And then we can open.
Let me correct. Definitely, I do not want to win because of race.
Yes. Not definitely don't want to win. Yes. Full stop important. Okay, so the final question I have, so let's say you've given your all and you will give your all, right? And you don't win. What happens to you? What are your plans? And let's say you win, what happens to the company that you are chairman of as well? So both options.
Which one do you want me to go first? Win or don't win?
Win first, let's. On an auspicious note, we start.
What are the odds of me winning? Okay. If I win, what happens to my company? I will have to divest of all my business interests, because I do not want to be any perceived conflict of interest situation. I spent 8 years building up my company at Vendor Investment Management after I retired from the GIC, because I want to make my experience and expertise available to other investors in Singapore, endowments, foundations, family offices, who feel that they could benefit from my experience. So I've done it for 8 years. It is a profitable company. If I win the presidency, I will have to divest of my business interests. It will be a big financial sacrifice because the company is doing very well. But I'm answering a higher calling, and money is not my goal in life. I would like to have the honor of serving the people of Singapore one more time. The second scenario, if I don't win, I win back my life. And I will go back to my company with the hope that I can build a vendor into a local indigenous fund management company that Singapore can be proud of. That is how I will continue to serve the people of Singapore.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a win-win to me. Either way. All right, so let's open the floor to questions. Please identify yourself. We have about 1 hour, so until 9 p.m. Identify yourself and your organization and try to keep your questions short as possible. Yes, we'll take 2 or 3 questions. Please go to the mic. There's no roving mic, so we can take 2 or 3. Yes.
Do you want us to identify ourselves?
Please do, yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes in the past,
Yes.
when I was okay, I have 2 questions, 2 concerns related, and the questions are connected. The first one is that there's, I think, during these last few days of campaigning, quite a lot of mention of independence of the candidates, being non-partisan and so on, right? And I think you mentioned just now also the Constitution says that candidates should not be part of a political party. I think that, yes, the Constitution says that, but if we want to talk about being truly independent or non-partisan, it should go beyond just being a member of a party. It should be a person who is hasn't been very dependent on the establishment, right? The government, in short, in the past, in his career, in his all his life, then only can you say that, this person is truly independent, non-partisan. I think if you worked for the government for a long time, I mean that's an important link. That means that you are you're not non-establishment. So, but I'm not saying that's wrong. All I'm saying is that Singapore is a small place. Everyone has some connections, either with the establishment or maybe a party. A party might approach you and say join. So if I joined a party 5 years ago and then I resigned after that, it doesn't mean that I'm not independent-minded, I'm not non-partisan. I cannot be non-partisan. I don't think that's correct. So this overemphasis on so-called non-partisan, being non-partisan candidate. What is really more important, I think, is the candidate has to have an independence of mind. It's not an independence necessarily from government or party. Independence of mind is more important. You're going to be a president. You're going to play a big role in the country, in uniting the people, or in projecting Singapore. And can you offer fresh thinking, or are you part of a group thing? I think that's more important. So I would like Mr. Ng to comment. Because otherwise, if we say anybody who is a member of a party cannot come out and stand, resign from the party and stand as president, I think we are shrinking our talent pool a lot. And you will have very few good, and you will lose a lot of talent who cannot, because they cannot stand.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, please comment on that. I have another question.
Oh yeah, so please, just quickly, your second question.
Can you hear the answer first?
No. So we'll go 2 or 3 questions first, then we'll answer.
Okay. Now, the other thing I have some concern about is more relating to, again, Mr. Ng, I think you said that, you joined this contest because you felt that Mr. Tharman, who had already declared he was standing, there should be a contest. And so you thought that, you said, that was a motivation, important motivation, right? I don't think that's a good enough reason to stand for such an important post, just so that there is a contest. I respect your approach, but I disagree with it respectfully. I think it's a wrong assumption, a wrong basis to go out and stand in the first place. And you have used the words many times. You have said, I'm making a big sacrifice. I don't think it's a big sacrifice to stand to be a president of the country. It's a privilege. It's an honor, not a sacrifice. Why should it be a sacrifice? I disagree with that very strongly. So I think that since you say that you stood because you want to give Mr. Tharman a contest, and now that when you saw 4 candidates coming up, and later on 3 were qualified, you should have said, I'm backing off. I'm stepping down. Because let there be a true contest for people who want to be the president, rather than I'm standing because I want a contest, people want a contest. I think that's a wrong assumption. I think the final thing must be you want the best man to be the president.
Mr. Mano, is that a question?
Hang on,
Sorry,
I want to finish. I want to finish.
Yes,
I think Mr. Ng, in his heart of heart, knows who is the best man who should be the president of Singapore. And I think therefore, even now, it's not too late to say, I back off honorably. Because you keep on saying that if I lose, it's okay, I get back my life. So we would like to give you back your life. With due respect, sorry.
Thank you so much. So can we get, hopefully it's a bit shorter.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Mr. Ng and moderator. I was in the education service for 34 years. That's my only employment. I saw your broadcast yesterday, video. You mentioned somewhere in the 7 minutes you have outreach programs for the less fortunate society. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong. So I was in the education service, just like you. I happened to serve among the least branded secondary school in Singapore. The 2 schools that I served, they have disappeared from the city. So you know what I mean, alright? So I have seen and witnessed, I faced a lot of challenges of these type of kids and parents. So it's a society problems, right? A lot of dysfunctional family, not to mention academically, they are among the lowest in Singapore. Right? I'm not sure whether members of public get to know the real situation. So I was in the service for 34 years. It was not my choice to go to this type of school. I was sent, right? But thankfully I survived, right? What I'm saying that I witnessed example. Just quote example, moderator, if you don't mind. My kid died from overdose of drugs. All right, kids. I received students from schools, problematic schools. They come to my school. You get what I mean? A, B, C, D. So I have a number of problematic kids. Police case coming from boys' home, girls' home. So my school and staff, we manage these types of kids. Right? So it's very, very tough. And Mr. Ng, on your 7 minutes of your video, and 7 minutes out of 9 minutes, you mentioned your outreach program, reaching out to this underprivileged society. You even went to the extent to the welfare of animals. Fantastic, right? Incidentally, this morning, I'm a tennis player. I saw the video, I think it's circulated among the tennis fraternity. The video of you at the age of 75, a short clips of your video playing tennis, and you are very rare player with ambidextrous. No? You play forehand, then correct me if I'm wrong, then you hit with your backhand. Fantastic. Right? So my issue is if you are elected president, right, on the social aspect, how would you work with the government, right, to reach out to these underprivileged kids and the family? You're talking about cohort. Let's say we use a simple example, 40,000 students enrolled, right? So put it in a simple percentage, let's say 5% would do. So you're talking about 2,000 kids. So that means that more or less equivalent to 2,000 families. Right? So as an elected president, what else can you do apart from the existing assistance given by the present government, right? The sitting government, to reach out? They have family service, because I work with family services of the Ministry of Community.
Thank you.
So what else can you do?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think, sorry sir, we'll take these three questions first, and then we'll go to you. So, and I think the first round maybe I was a bit too liberal with the length of the questions, and we only have about 45 minutes more, so I seek your cooperation. Keep it as succinct as possible, right? Okay, so the three questions: first, establishment versus party. Second of all, why not pull out now? It's not a true sacrifice anyway. And the final one is the president. What can you do for the less fortunate in addition to existing policies?
In regard to the first question about establishment, that because I worked 45 years in the public service, I'm considered part of the establishment. I do not deny that. I'm very proud of that. But I think you are doing a great disservice to a very large number of people who work in the civil service. Political parties come and go. It is the public administration that represents the continuity of good public administration. The majority of top civil servants, I might say, do not belong to any political party. And it's precisely because of my experience in public service at the MAS, in the GIC, that gives me the domain expertise and the competence to stand for the presidency and are capable of doing a good job in safeguarding our reserves and safeguarding the integrity of the public service. Independence of mind. We are who we are. We cannot say yesterday I was like that, today I'm like this. We are who we are. And I feel that the office of the elected president was first conceived in 1984 by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. He was concerned that if we have a freak election and a bad government comes into power, and there was no check on the spending of the reserves, all the hard-earned savings of the people of Singapore will be gone in no time. Or, if a good government becomes corrupt, if the Prime Minister becomes corrupt, as we saw in neighboring countries, because he wants to win votes, he wants to do the populist thing, or he has business friends who he wants to award with huge infrastructure projects, ways will be found to spend all the past reserves. it was precisely to forestall those two high-risk scenarios that the office of the elected president came into being. Now, if you have a situation where the former finance minister becomes the president, and the new finance minister or the prime minister was someone who had worked with you, been mentored by you, I think it's possible, but it's also quite likely that there will be a human conflict of interest situation. So let's be practical about this and not get into a philosophical independence of mind. What was the third question?
What, as a president, what can you do for the underprivileged, in addition to existing policies?
Let's be clear. The president does not make economic or social policies. That is not his job. His job is, number one, to safeguard the reserves. Number two, to maintain the integrity of the public service. And number three, to unify the people of Singapore. So I would say that when we are dealing with social problems, such as the one that you alluded to, I think we could perhaps think of it as a tripartite approach. Self-help, government help, president's help. Well, self-help is within the family. I mean, the youngster who is vulnerable to the kind of risk that you mentioned, that in our education system, we should find ways of helping these vulnerable children to deal with the problem of stress, to deal with the problem of being isolated, to deal with the problem of lacking in self-confidence. And that's why I spoke about the three things that I would like to do. Not that I can order the government to do it, but I can use the office of the president as a cheerleader. So these are the things that we should. And I would encourage as many people in Singapore as possible, don't be just entirely dependent on the government. The government should do its part, and I think the government in its wisdom will do its part, because if it doesn't deal with these problems, it is not going to maintain the confidence of the people. So I would like to see really a tripartite approach, starting with, I say, self-help. So I would like our education system in all schools to start as early as possible to teach meditation, mindfulness, as young as possible. The earlier you start, the better. Because that is the best way for them to get relief from stress, best way for them to experience some peace within themselves. And then I speak about the need to have our children develop public speaking skills, because that's a way of building up their self-confidence. And I speak from my own experience as a poor boy growing up in Kangkar, going to, you might say, a rural area school. But I was so fortunate that I had teachers who taught me how to speak in public, and that gave me considerable confidence. So these are things that we can incorporate into our education system. And then finally, financial literacy, I mean, I'm quite surprised that many of our teenagers, they leave school without the basic understanding of finance. They do not know how to scrutinize an insurance policy, for example. And they do not know how to invest money prudently. And they fall prey to scams, they fall prey to people who just want to enrich themselves at their expense. So these are some of the life skills that I'm talking about, you know. So that's all I can say. I don't think the President can honor the Ministry of Education or the government to do specific things. The President must stay in his lane.
Thank you, Mr. Ng. And if I could just add on to what said. So it is true, I think it is a privilege, it's an honor to stand. But I think we also cannot deny it's a huge sacrifice. And not just Mr. Ng, I think Mr. Taman, Mr. George, when you put yourself out there, and to know how much of a sacrifice it is, just look at the attacks that Civil has gotten for not even contesting. And I think that is the biggest sacrifice, like putting yourself out there and your family is under scrutiny. So I don't think we can deny, while it's an honor, it is also a sacrifice.
If it weren't a big sacrifice, more people should have come forward.
Thank you. Sir, at the mic.
The name is I'm an NUSS member. I was about to ask the same question that you asked, and since it wasn't answered, I'm asking you again. And then I'll have my own question. I'm just emphasizing Manoj's question, which is, you said that one of the major motivations of standing for presidency is to provide competition for Mr. Tan. And since you knew before election day that there was competition in the form of Mr. Tan Kim Lian, so you should have, as he said, not make the sacrifice and go and re-win your own life and not stand for the election. That's the question that hasn't been answered. I'm asking it. My question is this. You know, both of you, by the way, let me just preface my question by the fact that I haven't made up my mind. I'm looking around. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to Mr. Tan Kim Lian. I can't listen to Mr. Tarnas. He's got enough exposure, so probably doesn't need, I know enough about him. So I haven't made up my mind, and I'm trying to make up my mind, and I have reservations on all three candidates. So I don't know what to do. So let me ask you this question. Taman, Mr. Taman, and you are, I would say, peas from the same pot. You worked together for years and years and years. And then for some time you became your superior. That's, you still work very closely. You are, as I said, in some ways, if you look at it mathematically, you're a subset of Mr. Taman Samakarata. So my question to you, give me one good reason why I should vote for you, the subset, rather than vote for the superset, Mr. Taman. Or, if I don't want establishment, then I can vote for Mr. Tan Kim Lian. I haven't made up my mind. I want to be convinced that you are the right person and not Mr. Taman. At this point, not convinced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like me to respond to that? Thank you. Let me take up your first question, that I'm just standing for president to provide a contest. You haven't understood the sequence of events that I took a lot of time to explain to you. That was only the third event that led to my decision. And then you have to look at the sequence of people coming forward to stand for the presidency. Taman was the first to declare. And then George Goh declared. When George Goh declared, my concern was that he may not qualify. And if he didn't qualify, what happens? Another walkover. That was the reason why I stood for election, not to contest Taman, but to ensure that there's no walkover. Do you understand that the people of Singapore do not want another walkover? That is the reason why I stood. You've misinterpreted my intention. And it was only after I came in that Kan Kin Glen declared. So very important to understand the sequence of the people who came forward. Now, why should you vote for me? And you said, I'm a subset of Taman. I'm 75 years old. He's 66. I started working in the MAS before he started. He chose political service. I chose public service.
I feel like that is every time I get into an argument with my dad, that's a card he'll pull, you know, and I always lose the argument. Okay, next question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for sharing today. As you said, you're 75 years young. I'm a younger person, and looking around the room, perhaps you notice. But I would like to ask, given that you are the oldest of the three presidential candidates, you're kind of, well, you're not quite near octogenarian territory, but getting there. How will you relate to younger voters? Thank you.
Is there another question? We can take one more. If not, we'll just answer it. Okay, yeah, we'll just answer. Oh yeah, please. Thank you.
My name is Thai. First of all, I want to thank Mrs. Ng for being so brave to stand for nothing. You are giving us a choice, and that's important. It would be a shame if you were to withdraw now. And if Mr. Pan Shangaran was indeed the best candidate, the people of Singapore would have voted for him. Right? So there's no reason why should ask you to withdraw. This is preposterous.
Okay, thank you. So maybe how will you relate to young voters?
Chronologically, I'm 75. Biologically, I think I'm 60. Well, you know, I spent a lot of time explaining how I hope to help the younger generation. I've been very specific about what I hope to be able to do. And basically, my message to younger generation of Singaporeans is, my life is a living example of why the younger generation should not lose hope, should not be overly anxious about the future. Because if they study hard, work hard, and develop all those life skills that I spoke about, they will be in a better position to exploit the opportunities that will be in the Singapore economy. Because I think we are in a good position in the global economy. Otherwise, why would so many multinational companies want to come and do business in Singapore? Why do so many people want to come and live in Singapore? So the best preparation that our young generation can make to capture those opportunities, study hard, work hard, acquire life skills. Now, I accept that it is probably much more difficult now than it was in my time, but it is still possible. And then the last few weeks have been an extraordinary experience for me to see the power of social media. That was the main plank of my campaign strategy. Because I don't have the resources. I don't have the party machinery behind me to print posters, put up posters, take them down all over the island. I don't have that personnel because I'm not government endorsed. But thankfully, technology and social media came to my rescue. And so I've learned so much that in this day and age with technology, we can reach millions of people. No doubt the younger generation, but even people in their 70s and 80s are familiar with technology. A great example is my friend sitting down here in front of me, Mr. Cho Kee Loon, 85 years old. He teaches people, the younger generation, how to use their mobile phones. So social media is the key, right? And the third resource I have is Sybil Lau.
You want to elaborate?
It's pillow talk.
Yeah.
You mentioned that if you were elected president, you would protect Singapore's reserves. Could you explain in more detail how would you go about doing that?
Sorry, what's your name?
With NUSS.
Thank you. How would you protect the reserves?
That is a sub. Okay, you take another question? All right.
Hi, my name is. Thank you, Mr. Ng, for your time tonight. I have two questions. Have you ever thought of joining politics to serve the people of Singapore? My second question is, if you were a movie character, what would you be and why?
Reserves?
Well, should we take the last question first?
Movie character?
I would like to be Brad Pitt. Well, let me take the first question first, because it's an important question about if I become the president, in what way would I be able to safeguard the reserves? Spend my whole lifetime preparing for that. When the finance minister or the prime minister wants to make a draw on the past reserves, they have to get the president's approval. How is the president going to make the assessment of whether the request is reasonable, whether the amount of money being asked for is reasonable? Now, of course, he's got a council of presidential advisors to help him, not all of whom are finance professionals. So the president himself must have some have a sufficient level of knowledge and experience to make that assessment. So let's take an example, the 2020 COVID pandemic. When the finance minister, Mr. Heng Swee Keat, went to the president, 5 supplementary budgets, totaling $100 billion. So if you were the president, how do you go about assessing that? Number one, the president needs to have an understanding of international economics, international finance. He's got to have an understanding of how the COVID pandemic can lead to possibly a depression in the global economy and what will be the collateral damage to the Singapore economy. He's got to be able to make that kind of assessment. And then secondly, when the request is being made, how do you decide whether that amount is reasonable? Now, it is not automatically true that the smaller the request, the better. Because when you are facing a crisis, the more forceful the response, and the quicker the response, the lesser damage. That is what I discovered when I was navigating the GIC through several financial crises. When I could see that during the 2008 global financial crisis, the response of the American government was slow and ineffective. And as a result, the recession was prolonged, many jobs were lost. In the 2020 pandemic crisis, the Federal Reserve Board, having learned the lessons of the 2008 global financial crisis, acted forcefully and immediately and saved the global economy from a depression. So it's not a simple matter of saying, just ask for less and I will approve. The president should initiate a discussion with the help of the advisors, and really come to a good judgment as to what is required. Now, the media was full of some reports that Mr. Tan Kin Lian thought the GIC should seek his advice, his guidance on how to invest. That is not the business of the president. Even if Mr. Ng Kok Song, the chief investment officer, became the president, that is not his job anymore. But here is another example. Every year when the finance minister presents his budget, there's an item called Net Investment Returns Contribution, NIRC. The government has the possibility of drawing up to 50% of the expected real rate of return for the budget. Expected real rate of return. What does that mean? Expected. Forecast. It's a forecast, not historical, actual. It's a forecast. The GIC, Temasek, MAS present their assumptions about the expected long-term real rate of return. The president has got to make a judgment. Is this number reasonable? Because a profligate government might boost the expected real rate of return, plug a figure, and therefore can spend more. That requires domain knowledge, expertise on how to assess whether the expected long-term real rate of return calculation is reasonable. So the president must know what are the right questions to ask in such a situation. I think it does require some experience and some practical experience in having gone through crisis. So that is how I feel that because of my work experience, I'm in a good position to make that assessment.
There was one more question. Have you ever considered joining politics?
Now?
In the past? Oh, in the past, right? Yeah, in the past.
I love my job in the GIC too much. Because I had a dream job. I started when I was 22 years old, fresh from university, with zero knowledge of investments. I didn't know what a stock was, what a bond was, having come from a poor family. But I had a great opportunity of working with Dr. Goh Keng Swee, our first finance minister. He gave me the big break in life. I graduated in physics, not in economics or finance. But it was what he wanted. He wanted somebody with a quantitative mind. Because he says, if you have a good quantitative mind, economics is quite easy. So there I was. So then I discovered, then I said, yeah, not too difficult. Economics, accounting, no sweat. So I grew to love it, and then I discovered that I actually like risk-taking. I like to take risk. Maybe it was because of my training, playing mahjong. And then I love it. I said, and gosh, to be able to learn investments, and investments is the pinnacle of finance, because you've got to integrate several disciplines: economics, finance, accounting, psychology, and understanding of global politics. So I really love my job. And then, to find a job that you think can bring up the best in you, and to know that if I do a good job, I am not benefiting the shareholders of Goldman Sachs. I'm benefiting the people of Singapore. That's a dream job. So well, let's put it this way. I was asked, but I could not be persuaded, because I really love my job. And I thought maybe my personality is not suited for politics, because I cannot do sweet talk.
Can have the gentleman first and then the other one. You can go first.
Yes,
Yeah.
My name is, I will call myself a young senior. Okay, I just want to ask you, because I find today's discussion very abstract, especially for investors. And this election will be decided by heartlanders.
Yes.
To the heartlanders, all this talk about protecting the reserve, NRIC, is very abstract. I think most people don't understand it. And I have been a financial reporter for 30 years. I spent most of that time trying to explain financial terms to people. I think after 30 years, right, I've not made much headway. So, my question to you, very simple. What is the simplest message you can give to the heartlanders that to win their hearts. People will vote with their hearts, they don't vote with their heads. And maybe in this respect, to help you along this way, we already have 5 elected presidents. I'm sure you will create your own style as a president, but which of the 5 elected presidents from WikiWave to the current one do you most identify yourself with? And to satisfy my personal curiosity, I just have this question in my head. You say money is not an issue, you've been there, you've done everything. I'm just wondering, and I noticed that you finance your campaign with your own savings, you're not accepting any donations. But should you become president, the president does come with a salary of $1.8 million. What do you intend to do with that $1.8 million? Thank you very much.
So that's, I counted a total of 3 questions. The next one.
You must remember the questions
Yes,
from me. Yes, sir.
My name is Managing Director. In case you're wondering, my wife and I became Singapore citizens in March this year. I've lived in Singapore 32 years, 3/4 of my adult life. And thank you, Mr. Ng, for stepping forward and giving me the chance to vote for the first time in about 33 years. When I brought to vote for British politicians, I lost faith in them many years ago. So thank you. I do trust you with our reserves. My question is, can you please add nature to the reserves of Singapore? We are facing the biggest crisis of all our lives, climate change, global warming, urban heat effect. So could you please add nature, the last one in forests and greenery in Singapore, to the Singapore reserves? Thank you.
Can you help me to
Okay.
even understand the question?
So there are 4 questions. What is the simplest election message for the Heartlanders?
Yes.
That's the first.
I once had a discussion with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in one of those private conversations we had after one of our meditation sessions. I usually try to pack up my things to leave immediately, but Mr. Lee says, Kok Song, stay on for a while, have a cup of tea. And then he proceeded to share with me how he was able to win so many elections. He says, Kok Song, the most important thing is to win the trust. He says, when I speak at a political rally, in my time, in the 1960s, 1970s, 60% of the audience do not know what I'm talking about. When I explain about my concerns about the global economy and Singapore, they looked at me. And then when you go to the polls, they ask themselves the question, can I trust him? That is the Heartlanders. Can I trust this chap? And Mr. Lee said, they trusted me. Because when I speak to them, I say, this is what I will do. And before the next election, I would do everything I promised. Now it's difficult for me to say, will I be able to do everything I promised? So I think it's not a head-to-head talk. It's a heart-to-heart talk. And that is why I try to explain to the ordinary Singaporeans my childhood, how from a very early age I took responsibility to lift my family out of poverty. Because I do not want to see my mother crying because she could not borrow money for my school books. That was my resolution in life. That's my life. I took responsibility when my late wife was dying of cancer for 19 months. I cared for her as best as I can. I took responsibility. I worked 45 years in public service, 30 years at the GIC. I was able to navigate the GIC through several crises. I could have quitted and get a much higher paying job, but I stuck to my job. I loved my job. I wanted to serve the people of Singapore. So my record of taking responsibility, of serving the people of Singapore, is what I hope to communicate to the Heartlanders. Sadly speaking, I'm not fluent in Mandarin. I can speak some Teochew, but the Teochews only make up 20% of the Chinese population in Singapore. That is a disadvantage. But I try to speak some Teochew, try to speak a few words of Mandarin, and I said, after the elections, I want to start my lessons in Mandarin. So it's sincerity and trust, not intellectual talk, such as independence of mind.
Okay, the next one was, which president do you relate to the most of the 5 elected presidents?
The commoner, Mr. Wee Kim Wee.
The other one is, what will you do with your salary? If you win, what will you do with your salary?
Instead of focusing how much I'm giving up from my business, you are focusing on the $1.4 million annual salary of the president.
Yes.
I'm hesitating because I do not want to tie the hands of future presidents
Agreed.
who may not be able to give up the salary. So it's not appropriate for me. If I do anything, I will do it quietly.
The final question was adding, and I don't think the gentleman meant formally, informally adding nature to the reserves, the idea of the president. So using the informal power of, not the formalized powers, but
Actually, I think the cost-benefit analysis should now add nature to our assets.
also you're saying actually formalizing this.
Potentially, why not? Because it has
Nature, our wildlife, our forests.
survival for the next
Yes.
decades.
No, there's a new terminology in global investments. When we make investments, we talk about different asset classes, with their return characteristics, their risk characteristics, their correlation with one another. The most interesting asset is natural assets. I think that holds tremendous potential. To have this natural asset class added to the opportunity of asset class investments. Now, having said that, it is quite difficult to, I mean, we are in the early days of ESG, how to translate intention to reality, how to avoid some of the difficulties of having what you might call a trustworthy asset class, because there are many fakes. There's greenwashing. You know, it's quite prevalent, because when you bring a new asset class in, there are so many parasites. Investment banks, I don't think they really care about the environment. They care about making money. So this is a subject which requires very careful thinking, right? And the other challenge, of course, is, well, I can buy carbon credits to offset the pollution that I'm causing. I mean, that is good, you know, but in other words, you can use money, you know, to atone for the sins you have created. To put it very, you know, sarcastically. But I really think that if mankind is really resolute, that we want to do something to save the environment, we want to encourage the evolution of natural assets, then collectively, countries must be willing to pay a price. And not fool people and say you can do ESG and also make a higher rate of return. Right. All right? So there's a matter of a social conscience at work here. And I think it would be easier to bring about a sustainable world quicker if government regulates and don't leave it, you know, to the decisions of profit-seeking companies.
Can I just ask a supplementary question?
Just a very quick one. Why what? Why Wikimi? Okay, why Wikimi? Just a.
Why?
Why Wikimi?
I had to choose one person. You look at his demeanor. You look at the kindliness of his face. And then you look what he does. He wasn't an elected president. He was appointed. He carried his office with great dignity, mainly by his kindliness. And he would often, if you read his memoirs, it's a very short, simply written memoir. He would speak about how he would handwrite little notes to ministers, to the Prime Minister, quietly, counseling them, offering them the benefit of his life experience. See? I think that is very laudable.
So just, we are run out of time, but just quickly, just take your questions and we are done. Please, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. My name is. I also want to thank you for reiterating that public servants serve the public and not political parties. So my question is, has there ever been one decision that the Finance Minister and President of Singapore has made with regard to drawing in the reserves in the past that you as a Singaporean would have disagreed with? And then what would you have chosen to do differently if you were president then?
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
This morning I watched a clip about you sharing about meditation, and I learned that you practice Christian meditation. So I have a question about faith. How has your faith guided your life and your decision to run for president? And if elected president, what would you do to promote maybe religious harmony and maybe appeal to people of other faiths or people who do not
Thank you.
believe.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you so much.
So in regard to the question, 2008 global financial crisis, Mr. Tharman was the finance minister. He went to Parliament and then went to the President to get his approval to create the jobs credit scheme. He also went to the President to get the President's approval to guarantee bank deposits in Singapore. I think that was a great decision. I would have done no differently. Second crisis was the global pandemic crisis, when Mr. Heng Swee Keat, in a succession of 5 supplementary budgets, sought the President's approval, and the President agreed. My only comment about that was too many budgets. It was not my point I made that it would have been better to go for something big. And if the money wasn't necessary, don't use it. But don't keep coming back every 2 months. Now, having said that, it was very difficult to say how serious the crisis was going to be. You know, I mean, so when you are the gladiator fighting in the arena, it is so stressful. It's easy for everybody watching, say, you should have done this, you should have done that. Here I am doing the same thing with Mr. Heng. But my point was that if you have experience dealing with crisis, it's better to act forcefully and quicker than to hold back. Because once factories are closed, jobs are lost, very difficult to get them back. So then the second question in regard to meditation. Religion. I come back to the point that I made earlier on about the deepest identity we can have as human beings, that we are all one. And religious identity is a narrower identity. But having said that, all the great religions of the world have helped people in search of the meaning of life, and is to be applauded. It's good to have a religion to give you guidance in life, but we must always be aware that religious institutions are institutions. They are human institutions. And therefore religions will always want to seek a bigger market share. That is the limitation of the identity. So meditation, from my own experience, is going deeper within myself, going beyond even my religious identity. I'm a Christian, and Christianity has helped me to shape the values of my life. I'm very grateful for that. But I want to go deeper. And so one of the things that I would like to do as president was, for example, to make people be aware of the contemplative dimension, in other words, the practice of meditation in their religion, and encourage them to practice meditation in their religion. Because meditation is a universal tradition. You can find it in Christianity, you can find it in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Taoism, in Sufism. And that's why I speak about the 5 fingers. So think of the 5 fingers as the different religions in the world, or in Singapore. at the superficial level, at the top, we are separate. We are different. We argue who is better. Is the thumb better than this finger? But if each of us go deeper in the practice of our religion, we come to the center of the palm. That's where we discover and experience our common identity, our human identity. So in 2012, I had the opportunity of organizing a seminar in Singapore called The Contemplative Dimension of Faith. It was initiated by the Catholic Church in Singapore, of which I'm a member, and we went to the religious leaders of the different religions in Singapore, and we invited them to come together with us and have a 2-day seminar where each of the religious teachers talk about their tradition of meditation. And on each of those 2 days, we sat in silence and meditated together on 3 occasions. And in the silence that we all shared together, we experienced our common ground. This is something which I hope to revive and to do if I become the president.
On that, let me find out just a final short question from me. So, let's say you win. How long after that can we expect the Istana wedding?
I cannot answer you without proposing properly to Sybil.
And I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been
Thank
an
you.
absolute pleasure to have Mr. Ng. Please join me in thanking him.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I think, Mr. Ng, whatever happens, I think Singaporeans owe you a huge degree of thanks. Thanks for putting yourself out there. Please thank Sybil for putting herself out there inadvertently, but she still put herself out there. Thank you very much, Mr. Ng, and all the best. All the best. Thank you.
Let's take a photograph.
Thank you, Professor Walid and Mr.
Thank you.
for this very
Thank you.
thoughtful